We're still learning Lehavin Mah Shekasuv BeOtzros Chaim. I'm not sure, but I think this is our 8th class. We've learned about a lot of things. We learned about Ein Sof. We learned about the Moshel for Ein Sof of Tainug. We learned about the Rotzen. We spoke about how Rotzen, Tzimtzum Rishon, is preceded by a will for creation. Only then is there possibility for Tzimtzum. We learned, of course, about Tzimtzum itself. And when we discussed Tzimtzum, I brought from other Maimorim the Mashal of Rav and Talmud. And we discussed also in a lot of detail the idea that the Tzimtzum is Shaloi Kipshutei. That the event of Tzimtzum, where God Almighty removed the Ein Sof, to allow for there to be a space for the creation to manifest, to emerge, to be present, isn't literal. And over the last few classes, we touched on different aspects of the Shaloi Kipshutei. We talked about the Hamoiru B'His Galus aspect. We talked about that the Ein Sof is in the Makam HaCholol, you cannot see it. We talked about the fact that the Oisias HaReshimu remain in the Makam HaCholol. And last week we even mentioned this idea of the Oir HaReshimu remaining in the Makam HaCholol. That in the Oisias, when you say it over the Migras, you have some Oisias. The word Oir HaReshimu was a bit strong, even though the Middle Rebbe uses this lashon. If you remember how I finished last week's class, I'm not sure what to do with Eir HaReshimu because of the Kapasta thing, but that's basically the idea. Tonight's our last class on Tzimtzum. In Mitzvah Hashem, next week, B'li Neder, we're going to learn about Kav. Kav means that after Hashem removed the Ein Sof, to allow for there to be a world, then he has to reinvest, re-emerge, bring out again Ein Sof in a focused way, because the world has to be created proactively as opposed to passively. You don't make anything by clearing out. You make something by investing. Hislap sheskei chapel, but proactively investing. I left for tonight 8 lines. That's what I did. I left 8 lines. I could very easily have swallowed up these 8 lines in last week's class and we'd be talking about Kav tonight. I didn't do it. I didn't do it not because I'm looking to stretch this Maimon out over a longer period. I did it because I felt it was apropos that the ideas that the Rebbe just mentions here tangentially should be given more attention. We should delve into these points and we should discuss them and we should explain them and so forth. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to read a few lines, then we're going to talk, and then we're going to read the same few lines again. Let's get us context. The context is we're talking about Tzimtzum Rishon. We're talking about the idea that Arizal teaches us that everything is one with the Ein Sof. And therefore, for there to be reality, the Ein Sof has to evacuate itself from the space of what is itself, so to speak, to allow for the world to exist. And therefore you have the idea of Rotzen, and then you have the idea of Siluk, and you leave over the Makam HaCholol, Tzimtzum. We also discussed that the Tzimtzum is Shaloi Kipshutei, not literal. What we will discover is that the word Tzimtzum is more complicated than we think. There are various types, various models for the concept of Tzimtzum, which the Rebbe is going to touch on very, very briefly. And he's going to argue that of all the Tzimtzums we ever discuss in Chassidus, the most potent of all is the Tzimtzum Rishon. Let's read it inside, and after I read, I'll explain, and then I'm going to read it again so you'll understand what it is that we read in the beginning. Line 437. The way you translate these words would be as follows. Notwithstanding how powerfully the Alter Rebbe argued that the Tzimtzum is Shaloi Kipshutei, in the various points of Shaloi Kipshutei which we discussed over the last few classes that I summarized in the beginning of tonight's class. So even though none of it is literal and none of it is actual, it's all very theoretical, at the same time you should know that Tzimtzum zeh hu atzum. No Tzimtzum is as intense, as powerful, as great as this one. as Tzimtzum Rishon, as the first Tzimtzum. And he says that hu atzum yoser li'ein shir, it's far, far more powerful an event of evacuating light of Tzimtzum. Me'inyin ha'helim, from the idea of hiddenness, shayadei parso pargad, connected to the metaphor of a screen or a curtain that partially obstructs light. Why? Why is Tzimtzum Rishon a far stronger event of Tzimtzum than the Tzimtzum called Parsa? So the Rebbe explains on line 438, Shaparsa v'masach, the idea that Tzimtzum are called a screen and a curtain. In that case, you're actually revealing light, and the light is being manifest. It is only that it's being manifest through an allegory, through a mashal, through an analogy, which I will be to talk about later. And therefore, it does represent the interruption from a world to a world, between one world and another, because it's a shin hamhus. But it's a shin hamhus which is b'derech hislapshus. But the event of setting the stage for creation from the very beginning, at the very outset, that me ein save baruch, from the ein save which is before that tzimtzum, to be the kind of tzimtzum which allows for the reality of creation to exist in this makam hacholol, says the Alter Rebbe, this could never happen. Afilu ayadei, even if you would employ myriads of screens and garments. Because im kol zeh hayakel b'chinas ein sof. Because if you were to take Ein Sof, and of course the classic denotation to Ein Sof, as he means it here, would be the word eagle, and put it to myriads of parsois, it would remain the same eagle it was before. It wouldn't change. Pani requires the first Tzimtzum Rishon. What is different about Tzimtzum Rishon from Parsa? And the answer is, the light is removed. A screen means I have a little curtain, and the light is shown into the curtain, and it comes out the opposite side with a color, with a different wavelength, yes? Tzimtzum Rishon is not the light going through a screen. The light's being removed, and there's an interruption, and then there's a renewal of light. That event of creating a new oir, b'derech siluk and chazr v'her, by removing the light altogether and bringing light back later, is far stronger than any kind of screen. That before the Tzimtzum was in a state of Ein Sof, and like I said to you before, eagle. And then it shouldn't at all shine. This aspect, and the 10 kelim, which are the basis for the 10 spheres, in a revealed way. What remains is only a trace, which is the source of the kelim, and it is altogether removed. So the Alter Rebbe says that the only way to explain mystically how you could go from a world of Ein Sof shalifnei tzimtzum, pre-tzimtzum Ein Sof baruch hu, as he calls it, to the reality of the world which is after the tzimtzum. Parsa cannot do it. You have to have Tzimtzum Rishon, the first tzimtzum, which is called siluk l'gamri, removing the light altogether. And he says in 443, the only mashal to explain siluk is eisis agirsa. We talked about last week. Let's leave that alone. Now let's talk. When you learn Chassidus, they speak in general about 3 ideas of Tzimtzum. Everybody understands the concept of Tzimtzum. The concept of Tzimtzum means to reach a lesser recipient. I'm talking to you. Now, I'm no rocket scientist, I'm no gon, I'm no tzaddik, I'm a person, a simple person. But there may be things I know that you don't know, just simply because I learned them. My duty, my role as a teacher, is to give that information to you, but critical to that goal is that you should get it. There is really little point in me sharing something with you if I share it with you and you don't receive it. It's a waste of time. And that's where Tzimtzum comes in. Tzimtzum means where the teacher makes an adaptation, a focus, a concentration, a reduction, not that he communicates, but that what he communicates is received, is shared, is reached it reaches its recipient, its vessel. Tzimtzum is critical to creation because of that reason. Tzimtzum is the phenomena, Tzimtzum is the process by which creation is facilitated and godly light, godly life, godly energy is introduced to the various levels of creation in a palatable, in a absorbable, in a receivable fashion. This is true of every kind of tzimtzum. Tzimtzum always means reduction, but reduction not for the sake of diminishing, but to the contrary, reduction for the sake of delivering. You want it to be received by ploni ben ploni, by azulas, as we call it, by the alien, by the other, has to be reduced. Accordingly, you understand that you have a giver and a receiver, a megala, a revealer, and a revelee, one who is receiving that revelation. And between the megala, between the person giving, and the makabel, the one receiving, is tzimtzum. How great a tzimtzum is necessary between mashpia and makabel, that depends on their distance. If the mashpia is a little smarter than the makabel, they need virtually no tzimtzum. If the mashpia is much smarter than the makabel, but they both are familiar with one field of knowledge, they need a much greater tzimtzum, but still relatively speaking. But if the mashpia and the makabel are in two different worlds, or they have two different interests, the tzimtzum is much more vast, much more monumental, much more serious and real, because the gap between teacher and student is so large, it takes an enormous amount of tzimtzum to deliver at least something to the opposite side of that gap, that it should reach the makabel. What I just said, simple, common sense. Accordingly, Chassidus discusses three models for contraction, three models for reduction, three models for tzimtzum, three models for making the light less from the mashpia to the makabel should receive it. And from the bottom to the top, they are, quote, number one, tzimtzumim of seder ishtalshlos, end quote, which means the tzimtzumim throughout the chain reaction of worlds. The tzimtzumim, which are called, which exist in seder ishtalshlos, are called miyut, taking the same light and making it diminished, making it less. And this is true as you have a tzimtzum from a higher level to a lower level within which world? It's called miyut, tzimtzum of seder ishtalshlos. The second level is called parsa. Parsa means a curtain, a screen. A curtain and a screen doesn't change something a little bit, it changes it far more. And the parsa, or a screen, as it says here in the Maamar, is bein elam le'elam. Is the reduction, the quality of the reduction needed, not to pass something from one aspect of a world to another aspect of a world, but have to go from a world to a world. Since the distance, the gap between one world and another world is far greater than the gap that exists between one level and another level within the same world, so it's not sufficient to have a tzimtzum b'derech miyut to reduce the light. You have to have a tzimtzum b'derech parsa, which is called shina mahus. The quality of the light has to be changed categorically. But even parsa is a direct communication. Even though it's going through a screen which is changing its eichos, the teacher gives, the student receives through the screen. Tzimtzum arishan, the first tzimtzum is in a category all its own. It's neither tzimtzum b'derech miyut, nor it's tzimtzum of parsa b'derech shina mahus, it's b'derech siluk. The light is totally interrupted. Cut off. Stop. No more. And when the light is brought back afterwards, it's not only different than the light it was before, it's not a continuation of the light it was before, it's a new light. This is the most extreme example of tzimtzum. So the Rebbe says in here in Maamar that in order for it to go from pre-tzimtzum edition to post-tzimtzum edition, it's not enough tzimtzum b'derech miyut. It's not even enough tzimtzum b'derech parsa. You have to have tzimtzum edition because it's the most severe of all three tzimtzumim, and this is how it has to be. This is what it says here in the Maamar. What I would like to do is discuss this with you. I want to talk about all three tzimtzumim, explain the differences to you, because although the Rebbe here only gives us a few lines on the subject, I feel that since so much time and effort was invested in exploring the question of tzimtzum, that we should at least devote this one class to exploring, in addition to the first tzimtzum, which is the basic point of our Maamar, the remaining tzimtzumim, though our Maamar mentions them simply tangentially, derech agav, as a byproduct. Okay? So let's start with the simplest form of tzimtzum, which is miyut. And remember the rule. In Revelation, More is less and less is more. I'll explain to you what I mean. I'm sure you've heard my 3 rules of Gilui versus the 3 rules of Etzem. These are arbitrary. These are my own 3 rules. It can be 4, it can be 2. Don't take this too seriously. This is not the Maamar Chassidus. This is just a way of articulating something. When Reuven reveals to Shimon, there's 3 rules. If Reuven is revealing an idea to Shimon, there's 3 rules. Rule number 1, is that what the Reuven is giving Shimon, Shimon gets. If Reuven teaches something to Shimon, and Shimon doesn't receive it, Reuven doesn't give him anything. Rule number 2 is that it's impossible for Reuven to give something to Shimon which Shimon is unable to receive. If Shimon is not able to receive it, there's no point. Reuven has to. The only criteria is that the Reuven gets Shimon, what Shimon is able to receive. Which leads to rule number 3. Who really decides what Reuven should teach Shimon? The answer is Shimon does, not Reuven. Reuven can wish to shower Shimon with knowledge. If Shimon can't get it, he can't give it to him. The determiner of what and how Reuven can teach Shimon is Shimon. Now, Shimon doesn't sit down and figure out how he's going to be taught. Shimon's very presence and very limitations as an intellectual determine that. So revelation means A is giving B. Revelation means A is giving B only what B is able to receive and B receives it, which leads to rule number 3, that B determines what and what not Shimon is able to teach and not A. The opposite of the 3 rules of Gilui is Etzem. Etzem means Reuven is not giving Shimon. He's not trying to reach Shimon. He's allowing the essence to be what the essence is. And as a result, it doesn't matter whether the other person receives it or doesn't receive it. And accordingly, the decision to give is made entirely by the mashpia, has nothing to do with the makabel. Fine. In other words, what I just said that's relevant to us is that by definition, the word Gilui means Tzimtzum. Anytime I give you and you received it, it's less. In fact, you have a rare klal gadol in Chassidus. Chassidus doesn't have fancy form. But there's a klal gadol in Chassidus, a big rule. You have it in your Yedai Damask, and you have it also in Hemshech Sadei Daled. Those are the 2 places that I remember this klal gadol off the top of my head. And the klal gadol says, Kol Gilui ha'atzmi, hu helam lagabi azulas, v'kol Gilui lagabi azulas, hu helam ha'atzmi. That means in plain English, if I give everything that I have to you, Gilui ha'atzmi, I give you what I have in relationship with myself, you have nothing. And kol Gilui lagabi azulas, if I'm giving you something that you're able to receive it, it's helam lagabi ha'atzmi, I'm not giving you everything. In short, revelation means reduction. We imagine revealing something from A to B means adding. In reality, revelation means exactly the opposite. The very fact that I'm communicating to you and you're getting it means it's being made less from the way I have it. That's the process of Gilui. So Gilui always means Tzimtzum, as a rule. Gilui, the opposite of Gilui is Etzem. Etzem is not Tzimtzum, but Etzem doesn't reach the Zulas. Or to say it alternatively, Yadaitiv Avisav, the only way to know the essence of something is to be that essence. In as much as you're a Zulas, it cannot reach you. Impossible. And the rule of Gilui is that because it's being transmitted from Reuven to Shimon, from A to B, from Mashpia to Makabel, in the process being made less, and that's the very definition of Gilui. Kol Gilui, Lagabi Azuls, is Helam Hasmi. It's an absolute law in Chassidus, and it's very, very logical. Which means every Gilui is Tzimtzum. Anytime a Reuven gives Shimon, Mora Rachel teaches her 3rd grade class, there's an event of Tzimtzum. It's reduced, it must be. But how reduced? In other words, the echos, the nature, the quality of that reduction depends on what was there originally and what's reaching the student. In other words, how far apart the teacher is from the student, or more specifically, how far apart the knowledge as the teacher has it is from the knowledge as the student is going to receive it. So the Maimorim say there's 3 levels. Level number 1 is Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum means a teacher teaches a student and he reduces it. And if you really wanted to develop the idea, you would say it this way. When a teacher teaches a student and needs to develop the idea, he actually adds more words. He explains it better. Because the extra words and the additional explanation allow the student to understand it, but he allows the student to understand it in a much more peripheral way, in a much more limited way. I'm going to give you a simple example. Addition and subtraction, and multiplication and division are equals and opposites. Everybody knows this. To somebody who has mastered these areas of knowledge, they're inseparable, indistinct, and they're one. Right? If 6 times 6 is 36, 36 divided by 6 is 6, and so on. But when you teach this to a 2nd grader, or to a 3rd grader, or to a 4th grader, they're 2 very different ideas, taught, if not in different years, in different semesters. And it isn't till much later that the student is even made to see the synchrony, the achtos. It's the same thing backwards and forwards. It's the same idea, just forwards and backwards. Why? Simple. Because you don't want to confuse the child. Although it's very obvious that multiplication and division are 2 sides of the same coin, that addition and subtraction are 2 sides of the same coin. But when a person is learning mathematics for the first time, they're learning something which for them takes intellectual effort, and the narrower you can make the piece of information you're communicating to them, the more likely they are to grasp it. You will eventually expand what you're teaching them, but you want to first reduce it. So instead of telling the student, listen to me, forwards and backwards is the same thing and going in opposite directions, tell them these are the rules of multiplication. This is a multiplication table, and this is how it works. This is how you carry over numbers, and so on and so forth. And they teach them division separately, and then you show them later on their fusion, their unity, their achtos. So when a teacher teaches a student multiplication, and obviously the teacher understands multiplication. So clearly the way the teacher teaches the student is less than the way the teacher knows it himself. But the teacher is teaching the student the very same thing he knows. He's just reducing it. Instead of teaching him multiplication and division as 2 parts of one system, he's teaching him as 2 ideas. This is a reduction. A reduction means you're saying more words, more explaining, more detail, and revealing less intellect, less idea, less what we call in our culture, the light of seichel has been essentially reduced. But you're simply taking what you have, dividing it up into smaller concepts, giving them to the student one at a time so the student is able to receive them, and eventually the student is going to extrapolate backwards from the divided ideas as you taught them to him distinctly into the unity as you, the teacher, know them. And the change is simply by revealing it more, which means you're saying less, using more words, you bring it onto the level of the student. This is called a mashal for Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum means the same light that's been reduced. For example, in Atzilus, from Chochmah to Bina is a Tzimtzum. In Atzilus, from Chassid to Gvura is a Tzimtzum. Between Meichen and Midas, I don't want to get into the question of Parsha and Tzimtzum. This is not a class on the map. We're talking here the ideas, not the map. There's a change from the Eira Chassid of Atzilus to the Eira Gvura of Atzilus. But the change is that it's revealed more, so it's a different kamos, the quantity is different, but it's essentially the same light. In other words, Atzilus is a gilui of a mahus of a ha'ara of Ein Sof. Chassid of Atzilus is a gilui of a mahus of ha'ara of Ein Sof. Gevura of Atzilus is a gilui of a mahus of ha'ara of Ein Sof, just a little bit different, a little bit less. But then there is what our Maamar calls ha'hefsek bein ha'elamus. Bein elam la'elam, to go from a world to a world. When you're going from a world to a world, you can't just take the same light and reduce it a little more, because if you take the same light and reduce it a little more, it's the same world. You need a new light. A light which is categorically different than it was in the world before. And there are various names for this new light. We call it Eir Shel Tulda, we call it Ha'ara da Ha'ara, we call it Eir Nivdal, which means light comes from a higher world and it descends to a lower world, but in that lower world it doesn't in any way reflect the light that it was before. For example, sunlight. Sunlight can shine through a porch that's open on all sides. So there's an incredible amount of sunlight. Sunlight can shine through a large window or a large door. Sunlight can shine through a crack or a hole in a wall. In all of these models, the light entering into the receiving space is going to get sunlight, white light with all the colors of the rainbow, all the wavelengths of light are present in that white light. So it's always the same light. in the language of Kabbalah, it's Kiruv and Richuk, Chalein and Nekev. That's the holy words. But it's the same light. What happens, however, when you put that light through a red screen, or through a green screen, or through an orange screen? What happens now? The light that comes out the opposite side is not less of the same light, it's totally different. Ershel Tuldu. Before you had a white light which has theoretically in it infinite wavelengths. Now the screen itself absorbed all the wavelengths except for the green, which comes through the opposite side. So not only do you have less, you have a different category. It's less not only what we call in our culture in kamos and how much it is, it's less in echos. There's a different quality. It's a completely different level of light. If the white light is a metaphor for Ein Sof, then the colored light would be metaphor for a light which is no longer Ein Sof. It's just a meter, just a sphere. There's no Ein Sof. This is the second category of Tzimtzum, where I want to communicate from Mashpia to Makabel. We've already established as a matter of fact that every event of communication from Mashpia to Makabel involves a revelation, a Gilui, and that every event of revelation, every event of Gilui actually represents Tzimtzum, reduction, making it less. But now we're not simply going from a Sfira to a Sfira, we're going from a world to a world. And when you go from a world to a world, you need to have what's called Shinei Mahus. The light is not changing a little bit or a lot, it's becoming a new light. How new? Like the difference between white light and colored light, as opposed to a big light and a little light. Ha'ara the Ha'ara, Shaitis, Mazel, these are all similar concepts. And the mashal, Hagashmi, the physical illustration used to enlighten this, it would be the mashal of a screen. But there's an edel in a mashal. There's a mashal which Chassidus uses that's a little bit more sophisticated, more intellectual. And that is line 438, Ki'inyin hislapshus haseichel b'seichel mashal. If Tzimtzum means a teacher teaching a student information, the teacher has it in a more concentrated way, in a more unified way. As they communicate it to the student, he splits it up into various aspects, communicates one at a time, so it's reduced, but it's the same. If that would be the mashal for Tzimtzum, if that would be a mashal for the least level of reduction, the least level of change and modification, just kamos, not echos, quantity, not quality, the mashal, the illustration, to explain where the mashpia is communicating to the student in an ofen of Shinei Mahus, it becomes a new level of light, which with the physical mashal would be parsa, is the mashal of mashal itself, is the example of using an example. What's the difference between a teacher who wants to teach something to a student and reduces it into a few parts and teaches them one at a time, and a teacher who wants to teach something to a student and the only way he can teach is by using a metaphor, a parable, an analogy, an example? What's the difference? And the difference is very plain. When a person teaches something to somebody else, they're teaching him the same thing he knows. Even if they're teaching it to him in bite-sized pieces, it means they're teaching him one aspect at a time, but it's the same knowledge the teacher has in a reduced way. Anytime you're using an example, what are you saying? The idea that I want to teach you, I can't teach you. You'll never understand it. I'm teaching you something different to which you could relate. After I teach you this something different, which you could relate, try to extrapolate backwards, try to go backwards and try to figure out what I meant to explain to you that I can't explain to you only by using an example. For example, we want to understand the lakus, godliness, atzilus, so we say, mebisari echsalaka, study a person. We were created in the image of God, right, left, center, top, bottom, middle, as I explained to you so many times. So if you understand the physiology and the idea of a human being, you have a sense of Atzilus. Let me ask you a question. Study people for 100 years. What do you know about Atzilus? What do you know about Ein Sof? Why do we use the metaphor? Why do we use the mashal of Adam to explain Adam Ha'elyon? Because we don't have a choice. If we wouldn't use an example, Atzilus would remain a complete mystery, a total enigma. We'd never understand it at all. So we explain Atzilus with an example. The problem is, this example, which brings us closer to our comprehension of Atzilus, is at the same time the greatest obstacle between us and understanding Atzilus itself, because we never understand Atzilus. We understand the physical human being and no more. It's not like I take my idea, reduce it into 3 or 4 parts, and communicate it to you. You have the same idea I have. To use the lashon that's often used, it's a shini and kamos. It's a difference in quantity. When I use a mashal, you only have the mashal. You don't understand the original idea at all. You understand only the analogy. And you hope that through the analogy you will extrapolate backwards to understand what it represents in the nimshal. But in what the teacher is teaching the student directly is not understanding the original information at all. He's only understanding the example. So Parsa is a mashal, is an example, and in more spiritual terms, it's the mashal of mashal itself, it's the example of examples itself, which represents a much more severe category of reduction, where the reduction doesn't simply consist of taking the same idea and making it more divided and smaller, more revealed, but taking this idea and transforming it to an absolutely new idea in a new world, which is called Shini Amos, Ereshal Tulda, and so forth and so on. But you see, even Parsa, even the second category of Tzimtzum, which is the light going into a screen, is still a proactive giving. I have a light, I have a knowledge, and I give it to you. If I can't give it to you directly, I give it to you by reduction. If I can't give it to you by reduction, then I apply screens. But I'm giving you knowledge that I have. In communication, the knowledge that I have to you, the same knowledge as I have it, you are going to receive it, notwithstanding that it's being reduced in kamus, tzimtzum, and reduced in echos, so to speak, parsa. In a certain aspect, parsa is better than tzimtzum. You know why? Because when a person teaches b'derech tzimtzum, they reduce the idea into small parts, yes? When you reduce one idea into small parts, each individual piece doesn't have all the parts. On the other hand, when you use an example, a mashal, to explain an idea, although, quote, the mashal is davar zar me'animshal, the mashal is totally foreign to the nimshal, but the whole mashal is present. Every aspect of the nimshal is present in the mashal. So there's sometimes an argument made in Chassidus that a parsa is more loyal to the original, the mashal of a mashal. For a parsa is more loyal to the original than the tzimtzum, which is b'derech miyut. It's like, so to speak, it's a double-edged sword. But the constant in both of these events of tzimtzum is I have something to give to you. I am giving it you through reduction. Tzimtzum means I'm reducing it, but it remains the same. It's just difference in quantity and kamos. And parsa means I have to reduce it much more to bring it from a world to a world if it's a shini and echos. This is the idea. Tzimtzum rishon is altogether different. Tzimtzum rishon means the Eibishter wants the world, he stops light. He doesn't give it to us. He doesn't give it to us in a reduced form. He doesn't give it to us to a screen. He stops it. Altogether, stops it. Why? Because in Tzimtzum Rishon, the only way there's even the possibility for Tzimtzum Rishon to allow the space for the creation is for the creation to come first. It's not I have an idea that I want to share with you and here's how I'm going to do it. You exist. You need for me to share an idea with you. Tell me what I can teach you. That's Tzimtzum Rishon. The light is removed. The theoretical, the potential worlds determine and declare what it is that could be a nishpa from lifnei tzimtzum to lachar tzimtzum. But has to be totally interrupted. And after this total interruption, the light is brought back. But the light that's brought back is not the same light that existed before the tzimtzum. It's a categorically new light of a completely different level, where it isn't the teacher giving it in a lesser way. It isn't the teacher giving it using an analogy or a screen. It's the student taking from the teacher what the student can receive. That's why Tzimtzum Rishon is the most extreme of all the Tzimtzumim. In other words, the case of delivering, of revealing from a mashpia to a makabel, of the greatest distance, and therefore the greatest need for an adaptation and change, is from before the Tzimtzum to after the Tzimtzum. See, look, stop. Don't let the teacher reduce in commerce, reduce in eches. Turn the teacher off, let the student make the statement because that's the only way it's possible. While parsa is takashine amahos, it's going from the teacher to the student and it's changing its echos, its quality, but the teacher is giving it. And in tzimtzum, it's not even that, it just means it's reducing it. So this is what the Rebbe says in the Maamar, and I want to read it again. V'lachein tzimtzum zeh, 437 again. This first tzimtzum, who atzim yosel li'ein shir, is far more powerful me'ina helam from the degree of change and adaptation shaydei paso pargat through a screen and a curtain. And of course, if tzimtzum rishon is more of an adaptation than a change, then a parsa and a pargat is even more of an adaptation l'gabi tzimtzum b'derech miyut. When you have a screen and a curtain, that's actually revealing the idea from the teacher to the student. The teacher gives it. It's an analogy which a student receives as a new Metzias. V'zehu, and this form of Tzimtzum called Parsha is inyan a hefsek, the idea of a separation bein ha'olames, between a world and a world, bein olam la'olam. Within one world you just need Tzimtzum, miyut. From world to world you need Parsha. Says the Rebbe, Avol, this is only true once the first Tzimtzum occurs. To create the possibility of worlds from no worlds, from the godness of before the Tzimtzum. This can never happen, not through Tzimtzum b'derech miyut, and not even b'derech Parsha. You went through myriads of screens and curtains. It would remain the same eagle, would remain the same Ein Sof. And the only way to achieve this is Kiyadei Tzimtzum, a component allowed us to be interrupted altogether. Shahu, and this means, in other words, Histalkos ha'er, removing light completely. From the way it was in the state of Ein Sof, eagle. It should not shine in the vessels whatsoever in a revealed way. What's left over is the Rishimu, and then when the light is brought back, it's the Makabel who's determining the Gil. So the Rebbe wants us to understand that Tzimtzum, Arishna, is the most powerful of all Gilus. Now, in the next couple of lines, he's going to say, don't forget that Tzimtzum Arishna is Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshutei. But that's another point. The point in lines 437 to 442 is to explain that of all the examples of adaptation and change from giver to receiver, which of course is determined by how far apart the giver and the receiver are, there is no greater example of distance from a giver to a receiver than before the Tzimtzum, after the Tzimtzum. Simple, right? This wasn't that complicated. But now I want to go a little bit deeper. And I want to explain to you why. Why is the distance from pre-Tzimtzum to post-Tzimtzum so vast that the only way it can be done is through Silik, a total interruption? And I want to share two ideas with you that I found in Chassidus, of course. The first idea is the concept called Kolol Batzmusei. Everything is included in Atzmus. What Kolol Batzmusei means like this. We know there are levels. There's higher levels and there's lower levels. For example, Kesed is higher than Atzilus. Atzilus is higher than Bria. So we have Kesed, you want to have an Atzilus, you need a Pars. You have Atzilus, you want Bria, you need a Pars. Each Parsa changes the light in its Echos, Shina Mahus, the light comes in the Shel told in the new world, and then again it repeats itself when it goes from that world to the next world, and so forth and so on. And these different levels actually exist separately. In other words, within the framework of Tzimtzum, or within the framework of Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshutei, as we hold, Kesed exists. Separate from Kesed is Atzilus, and separate from Atzilus is Bria, and it's step 1, step 2, step 3. Chassidus says that before the Tzimtzum there's only God. Chassidus said that before the Tzimtzum there's only godliness. In other words, before the Tzimtzum there are no levels. There are no higher levels and lower levels. Now wait, scratch your head. All over Chassidus, we talk about levels of Ne'at Tzimtzum. But all over Chassidus, we also say that the levels of Ne'at Tzimtzum don't really exist as levels. In other words, what does level mean? Kesed is here, and Kesed has to be stopped. Atzilus is here, and Atzilus only begins when Kesed stops. Atzilus is here, Bria has to exist. Atzilus has to stop for Bria to exist. When Atzilus stops, there's room for Bria. Lifnei HaTzimtzum, we speak of different levels. The Mokar of Maamar Lehavin, the Mokar of Seva Lehavin, the Mokar of Atzmas Ein Sof, right? These levels don't exist. All there is God. All there is godliness. All the levels, Lifnei HaTzimtzum, are included in one another like as if they don't exist. In other words, the idea that there is a Ratz, a will, and because of the will, there's a Mokar of Maamar Lehavin, and there's a Mokar Macholol, and if there can be a Tzimtzum, you have to understand that Lifnei Tzimtzum, things don't exist separate from one another. There's the Eibishter. All the levels we speak about Lifnei Tzimtzum, as they are Lifnei Tzimtzum, are Eibishter. So why do we speak of levels if no levels exist? And the real answer is, like it says in Kabbalah's Farim, Misev Davat Edei Shisei. After the Tzimtzum, there will be levels. And after the Tzimtzum, the levels will be real. One level exists first, then it stops. A second level exists second, and then it stops. And then a third level exists, and so forth. So we say, it must be the Lifnei Tzimtzum. There are the idea of these levels, although in Lifnei Tzimtzum, the lowest Madrega of Ein Sof is as one with Atzmus and Hus, as the highest Madrega of Ein Sof, because they don't exist separately. They all exist Kol Batzmus. And therefore, the transition from before the Tzimtzum to after the Tzimtzum is huge. Even though before the Tzimtzum we speak of levels, and after the Tzimtzum we speak of godliness being revealed, before the Tzimtzum the levels don't really exist. The idea that we talk about higher levels and lower levels, and throughout this Maimon I've been articulating that you can only speak about Tzimtzum once you have Rotzen, and once you have Rotzen you have Neir Sof, which is the Shaychas Deilemus, and then you can speak about that having a Tzimtzum. That level of light doesn't really exist. Because that level of light is one with the Makar of Sevav Kalamin, and those two levels of light are one with Ein Sof Atzmus. Everything is Eibishter. The whole idea of levels of Lifnei Tzimtzum is in retrospect. Since after the Tzimtzum you see Hishtalshalos, then before the Tzimtzum the Exaltus exists potentially. Although Lifnei Tzimtzum there are no levels, all the levels exist the same, together. So when you have the Tzimtzum, you have the Ein Sof. We have the Ein Sof, you have Sevav Kalamin. Sevav Kalamin, you have Atzmos. The divisions are not the same kind of divisions as they exist Lacharat Tzimtzum. This is called Kol Batzmusik. All the levels of godliness pre-Tzimtzum exist in theory. In other words, there's no levels Lifnei Tzimtzum. There's no higher levels and lower levels. There's higher ideas and lower ideas that emerge as levels after the Tzimtzum. So if Lifnei Tzimtzum there's no levels, there's only ideas, that means the Ein Sof, which is the Makar of Amalek Alalman, in which the Ratzon happens, and the Makar Machal came into being, does not exist. It's a part of the higher levels. And if it's a part of the higher levels, it doesn't exist distinctly. If it doesn't exist distinctly, how is it supposed to emerge? And the answer is, Silik Lagamri. There's no other choice. All the madreges lefnei tzimtzum really don't exist as madreges; they exist as a lakus. And permit me to give you a piece of philosophy to help you wrap your mind around the difference between these two concepts. That after the tzimtzum, when we speak about worlds following one another in succession, they actually exist A, and then B, and then C, and then D, even in the worlds of Ein Sof. And Lifnei Tzimtzum, because everything is Kol Batzmusei, the idea of levels is really only a theory. And I want to share this with you. Two Hebrew words. The first word is the word Pashut, or Pshitus, plain. And the second is the word Klal, or Klolis, general. When you go from a higher level to a lower level, you're going from plainness to form. From general to specific, from Klal to Prat. So Maamar Chassidishe say that after the Tzimtzum, the highest level is called a Klal. Ak is called Elam Kloli. You have it in Voye Amunus Yitach and Beis, and Ela Dvorim Taf Reish Ayin Gimel Mestame Ubakama Makemes. Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum is called Pshitos, plainness. Now, don't misunderstand. In the world of Ak after the Tzimtzum, all the details of the later worlds will exist. But in Ak, they're Klal, they're in general. In the Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, everything that's going to exist after the Tzimtzum, and all the worlds and the aspects that will be after the Tzimtzum already exist. But as they exist Lifnei Tzimtzum, we don't call them Klal, we call them Pshitos. What's the difference? So you have a Maimir, which brings a Moshel. The Rebbe Rashab said, Lashon V'hu, Moshel, Mikvei Kedush Azmur, Haim Tzoi, Zetzuk L'Torah, V'hu Moshel Mechuva Me'od. He says it's a wonderful Moshel, in Mem Gimel. I think it's in the Pesach Hemshech Mem Gimel, if I'm not wrong. He says, what's the Moshel? Listen to this. You have a fantasy. You name it. But I mean a fantasy. This is the first time you ever thought of it. You never thought about it before. And of course, whenever Chassidus talks about any kind of fantasies, it's always the same. Fantasy to build a house. That fantasy is coming directly from your subconscious. And although in that image, in that visual, in that imagination, that home has some kind of a form, but it is a pure radiation of your subconscious as it shows itself in this particular form. Now, what happens to most fantasies of most people? We hope. Nothing. That's what they are. Throw them in the garbage. What happens if you think about it a second time? The moment you think about it a second time, the first thing that's happened is you chose to think about it. When it came to you initially, you didn't think about it. It emerged from your subconscious to your consciousness. You had the option of never going there again. You chose instead to think about it. The second thought is deliberate. So if you could think this through, the house eventually is built. And the house is built based on all the steps from the original fantasy to the first revisit of that fantasy. You think about it again and again till you break it up into details and you decide how many windows and how many rooms and how many floors, and every little detail is worked out, and you build a home, in fact. So think about this. That house started out as an image. A single unified image that over the course of your revisiting it, of your re-examining it, it becomes from one image more and more little pieces until it becomes every brick for itself and every piece of pipe for itself and every blade of grass for itself and so forth. Mena klal al prat, from the general to the specific. Mena pshitos al klal, from the plain to the general. So here's what Chassidus says. When you thought about the home the very first time and it was a fantasy, that fantasy was far more about you and then far less about house. Although you imagined the house was not anything you paid attention to, that you chose. It was you. And fantasy came from consciousness to your consciousness. So that house, although it exists, and ultimately you're going to build it, and that house as it exists in the initial fantasy has all the details that will become the home in the final analysis. But all those details, not initial house, are fantasy. They're not house, they're you. That's why it's called pshitus. All the details are part of the plainness of the person. The moment you think a second time, that's not about you, that's about house. And although it's going to take 100 steps till the home will be built, in fact, that's called klal. You're looking at the whole house, trying to identify pieces. And ein bechlal ela ma shebefrat. That klal is only details. There's nothing about it more unifying than the collection of details. This is a classic, wonderful insight that helps explain the difference between the lowest levels before the Tzimtzum and the highest levels after the Tzimtzum. Everything before the Tzimtzum is a fantasy. What does that mean? Not that it isn't real. It's a reflection of Ein Sof. That's it. There's Sfiras and Ketz. There's Sfiras and Gnuzas. There's Alis Aratzen. There's Hashara. There's all kinds of things. Everything Lifnei Tzimtzum is simply a reflection of how it's Ein Sof. The lowest level of Lifnei Tzimtzum is called Pshitus. Tzimtzum Erishin stops that. When the world will re-emerge after the Tzimtzum, now it's world, now it's not God. So even at the very highest levels of after the Tzimtzum, it's already about world, although it's going to take many steps to go from a skira achas, from machshava gduma, into a detailed creation in 6,000 years and so forth and so on. In that machshava gduma, it all exists in detail, but they're klal in general, because it's about world, it's not about God. This is an enormous disparity between pre to post Tzimtzum. Before Tzimtzum there's worlds, after Tzimtzum there's worlds. But before Tzimtzum's worlds exist because God exists. After Tzimtzum's world exists because I'm interested in the world. That change is so enormous that the only way this can take place is to have a siluk lagamri. You have to stop the godliness. Because as long as godliness is focusing, as many levels and layers and worlds you're going to be focusing on, how many details of those words you're going to examine, they're all part of the fantasy. They're all part of the pshitos of Elikus, not the klal of Elikus. They're a part of the kolol batzmusay, how the world is an expression of godliness, and godliness is one, and there's nothing to do with worldliness. This is the first idea I wish to share to explain why. Though we know that we have three categories of tzimtzumim, tzimtzum b'derech miyut, part which is shina mahus, and siluk l'gami, which is tzimtzum erishin, the transition from pre-tzimtzum erishin to post-tzimtzum erishin must happen by totally stopping the light, because you're going from kolol batzmusay, where all the levels exist only in theory, to actual levels. You're going from pshitus to klal, from worlds and things and details which are all simple expressions of the Ein Sof's infinity and plainness, to actually identifying details. This is the first of two thoughts I wanted to share with you in explaining why the gap between pre and post Tzimtzum is so huge that you need to have so great an event of Tzimtzum. That's number one. Now number two. This number two appears, of course, in Hemshech Hayim Beis, in the second chelik. And the Rebbe has repeated it many times and celebrates it. It's a chap. It's a commentary. It's a short little phrase. But it provokes in a way that never stops provoking. it crystallizes things. It puts things to absolute categories in such a way that it leaves you no room to maneuver. You can't even get confused about this. And this is the following. The Maimorei Chasidus say, every aspect pre-Tzimtzum, from the highest to the lowest, goes under the category of, and I quote, Elikus v'pshitus elames v'hischachos. Godliness is natural, and the world is what's novel. Post-Tzimtzum, after the Tzimtzum, and there are many levels, many layers, many worlds, and so on and so forth. But from the highest level to the lowest level, we say, elames v'pshitus. The natural truth is world, Elikus v'hischachos, godliness has to be rediscovered. And the difference between Elikus v'pshitus and elames v'hischachos, and elames v'pshitus and Elikus v'hischachos, is impossible to bridge. Because Elikus v'pshitus and elames v'hischachos means that the elames are part of Elikus. On the other hand, the elames v'pshitus and Elikus v'hischachos means that Elikus is part of elam. And the difference is huge. And the Maimorei Chasidus give an example. Avraham Avinu and Moshe Rabbeinu. What's the difference? Avraham Avinu was a human being who found God. Moshe Rabbeinu was a godly man who discovered the world. And when you're a human being who finds God, no matter how well you find God, you're in the world where God is discovered. And when you're a godly man who discovers there is a world, as much as you're convinced that the world exists, it's ultimately all godly. So though Lifnei Tzimtzum, there are all these steps and stages and Tzimtzums setting up the Tzimtzum edition. And though after the Tzimtzum, there's so many lofty levels, higher and higher and higher. The highest level after Tzimtzum is a world that discovers God. The lowest level before the Tzimtzum is godliness that suggests, that fantasizes about the idea of a world. These two thoughts. Number one, the idea that Lifnei Tzimtzum, everything is kol bat tzmusay, and therefore it's all pshitos. And after the Tzimtzum, it's not kol bat tzmusay, and therefore even at the highest level, it's only klal. And the second idea, that Lifnei Tzimtzum is, everything is godliness, and the world is, so to speak, a byproduct. And after the Tzimtzum, everything is worldliness, and godliness is something you have to discover. These two ideas explain why to go from pre-Tzimtzum to post-Tzimtzum, you can't use miyut. You can't use parsha, shina mahus. You have to have siluk. Stop. Leave nothing over. Then there's a possibility for the new level to emerge. It's possible for things to no longer be kol bat tzmusay, but to be chutz la'etzem. And it's possible for things not to be elikus b'pshitas ne'elam as be'eschachas, but to be world. Let's read it a third time. 437 again. V'lachein therefore tzimtzum zeh, the first tzimtzum, which is the basis for the process of creation altogether. Who otzum yesid is the most intense. Le'ein shir, far more, immeasurably more. Me'inyan helam, from any kind of post-tzimtzum tzimtzums. Certainly it's more than tzimtzum b'derech miyut, but it's even more of tzimtzum b'derech shina hamahus, which is called chayadei parso pargu, through a curtain. Because shaparsa v'amasach, a curtain and a screen. Even though it changes the quality of the light, but the light goes into the screen to come out differently on the opposite side. Like the mashal of his slapshus, take a mashal using an analogy to explain something. This is the extreme tzimtzum which is needed to separate between one world and another world, between a world and a world. Aval, however, is to create the very beginning and possibility for worlds altogether. Which is pre-tzimtzum. This will never happen, not through many tzimtzum and not through many parsois. Myriads of screens and garments will not sufficiently change kol bat tzmusay into being chutz la'etzem. It will not sufficiently change pshitas into klal, and it will not sufficiently change elikus b'pshitas into elames b'pshitas. Why? Because im kol zeh hoyakel b'chines ein sof. No matter how many times you'll parse it, it will still remain eagle. It will still remain essentially the same. And the only way to effect the change which allows for worlds to exist, ki imaydei tzimtzum u'makam pani. Interrupt the light completely. Interrupt. There's nothing here. And when something new comes back, it's absolutely new. Remove the light completely. From its Ein Sof condition. In no way should it be revealed. This level of Ein Sof, be'esas and the kelim which remain, in a revealed way, all that remains is a trace, which means the makar kelim and perhaps the Eidar Hashimu, which we talked about last week, and no more. But only through such an extreme tzimtzum is the possibility to be this kind of change from kol batzmos to chutzlatz, and from pshitas to klal, and from elikus pshitas to elamis pshitas. 443, v'hamoshel lozeh, and the way we explain tzimtzum harishan is al derech moshel lamatam eisis agir sechol. You're not thinking about something, you forgot about it, you're simply reciting words. Sure. This is the shir. This is what I wanted to teach you tonight. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines. But the Alter Rebbe can't resist, and he flips again back. On the other hand, be'emes, you shouldn't forget that ultimately, no matter how extreme tzimtzum rishon is, and it's more extreme than any other, the tzimtzum shaloi kipshutei. All those changes, the change from kol batzmos to the chutzlatz, the change from pshitas to klal, and the change from alakus to pshitas. To elam pshitas is only to the worlds, not to the Eibishter. Aval etzlei yizbarach, and as much as Hashem himself is concerned, harei be'emes, to be sure, gam be'esies elu meir emezgala ha'er mamish, the same Ein Sof lifnei tzimtzum is still shining, which means it's still kol batzmusei, and it's still alakus pepshita, it's still pshitas, and it's still alakus pepshitas. K'mei shahaya kedem ha'tzimtzum v'chulu, just as it was prior to the onset of the very first tzimtzum, but at least from our point of view, the world now exists because a radical enough tzimtzum was used to create a radical enough change for us to be able to exist and serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu and make a dira le'yizbarach b'tachteinu.